Morning. It's a breezy July morning today. Seems like it's been breezy a lot here in this part of the country, in eastern Michigan. And again, I thought I would give you a thought here this day from the Bible, from Psalm 91. If you want to look there, Psalms is, of course, in the middle of the Bible. It's easy to find. The 91st Psalm and the first verse or so says this: He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. You think about that for a minute and you realize that God can provide shelter and security for those who come to Him and put their trust in Him. That's of course true with salvation, and yet it's also true with all areas of life, that He is the shelter, He is the safety, He's the sanity, He's the truth for all those who are willing to come to Him. But you have to come into that shelter, don't you? Let's compare it to something that we can understand easily, which is, we know that, for example, it's going to rain outside. Even today, they're predicting here storms later on today, and they're a little overdue. And so if I'm out, for example, in a field, it would be wise of me, if I see the rain starting, to run under that shelter. I want to be dry. I don't want to be drenched, right? So why would I stand out in the field and say, God, why are you doing this to me, when I could run to the shelter and be dry and safe? If you ever play golf, you realize that many courses will have at least one, if not a couple of shelters. They're not much. They're just little wooden overhangs where you can go to in case of some heavy downpour, and you take yourself and your clubs and your cart or whatever and go into that shelter. But what good is a shelter if I don't avail myself of it? What good is, again, standing out in the open there and hoping that I don't get wet when I see the storm coming? He says there, if you look at it, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. That's, of course, poetic language. But how can I, again, abide in the shadow of the Almighty if I'm not dwelling in the shelter? If I'm not dwelling in the shelter of the Most High, how can I enjoy the blessings of God if I'm not following God? How can I expect God to bless my life when I'm openly refusing to do what He says? The blessings of God do come even in spite of our disobedience. He says He sends rain on the just and the unjust. He causes the sun to shine on good people, on bad people. That's true. Jesus said that. God's merciful. But how can I really, again, expect shelter? How can I expect peace in my life when I'm continuing to stand there on my own? It's really common sense, isn't it? I mean, we understand this in all kinds of areas of our practical lives. I'm not willing to work, so I don't have any money. We understand that very well. Most people understand that pretty easily. But others are still waiting for that miracle, something or other to happen. But you have to be willing to work, right? How are you going to have a garden? Our neighbors are planting gardens across my fence over there. But how can you expect to have any kind of vegetables if you're not willing to till the soil and get the hoe out, right? 2 doors down, the man set out a sprinkler, and I saw him last night turning it on because he wanted to have a little extra water on whatever he planted over there. But if he never did that, he can't be surprised if, even if he planted his garden, that it all dried up. There's work involved. There's responsibility involved. There's surrender involved. How can I say, you're my refuge, you're my fortress, and yet never really trust in him? Never really run to him. You know, the old stories of the Middle Ages when they had their towns fortified. How can we expect the enemy not to overtake us if we don't run and hide in our stronghold? We can't. But the truth is, God will be there for us, and we can, again, abide, live in that shelter if we allow ourselves to believe in him, if we trust in God, if we put our faith in God's Son and turn to Jesus for all things. Well, these are some thoughts today. Welcome your comments. God bless you today. Have a good day today. And remember, that promise is there, and it is such a wonderful promise. That's the place where we live in God. But I can live in him if I would but surrender to him and yield all things to him. Peace to you. God bless.